Your phone dings and you see their name, and instantly you feel better. Your chest relaxes, your mood shifts. You feel calm again. Earlier, before that message came through, you were distracted. You kept checking your phone. You couldn't fully focus on what you were doing because part of your attention was waiting. But then after they text you, that feeling disappears. Not because it resolved anything, but your body feels settled again. Then time passes, and without maybe even realizing it, that unsettled feeling comes back. You start thinking about when you're going to hear from them again. You replay that last conversation over again in your mind. You wonder if you said something wrong or if you just imagined the closeness. You start thinking about what you might say next, even though you told yourself that you wouldn't reach out. And this just keeps repeating. The waiting, the relief, and the waiting again. If you recognize yourself in this, you may have not even realized that this experience has a name. It's called limerence. If you have not heard of limerence before and you don't know what it is quite possible that you are about to be mind blown. Learning about limerence sometimes answers so many questions for people and explains experiences that they've had and why, and helps them feel confident that they will never find themselves stuck in that same situation ever again. Welcome back to this chapter rewritten. If this is your first time here, I'm Nikki, and I'm so glad that you found this conversation. And please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Limerence is a psychological state where you become intensely focused on someone who doesn't fully or consistently reciprocate your feelings. There might be moments of closeness. They might be giving you some attention. There might even be chemistry. But there is no steady emotional availability. Instead, your emotional stability becomes tied to small signs of interest from someone who stays just out of reach. This is why limerence doesn't usually happen in secure mutual relationships. It forms when there's uncertainty, when the connection feels possible but never really solid. When you're left filling in gaps and hoping for something that isn't actually being offered in a consistent way. That uncertainty keeps your mind engaged and your nervous system alert. You're not responding to love. You're responding to inconsistency. And the more inconsistent the connection, the stronger limerence can become. This is also why limerence can feel so confusing, because the person isn't absent, they're just not fully there. And that partial availability is what keeps the cycle going. If this is the first time you're ever hearing about limerence and you have no idea what it is, limerence is a state of involuntary, obsessive attachment to another person. It's often characterized by intrusive thoughts, emotional dependency, idealization, and an intense preoccupation with whether feelings are returned. One of the defining features of limerence is that it depends on uncertainty. There is typically a lack of clear, consistent reciprocation, which keeps the mind in a constant state of anticipation and interpretation. Small signs of attention feel significant. Silence feels distressing. For the person that's experiencing limerence, their emotional state becomes closely linked to perceived signals from the other person. A message, a look, a brief interaction can bring relief or excitement. A delay or absence can trigger distress, rumination, and a sense of internal imbalance. It's important to know that this is not a choice. They show up without invitation and are very difficult to control, even when the person recognizes that the situation is unhealthy or doesn't align with their values. Another core feature of limerence is idealization. The mind fills in gaps with imagined closeness, imagined futures, imagined meaning. But this doesn't come from delusion. comes from the brain trying to resolve uncertainty and create emotional coherence. Limerence also involves a strong fear of rejection or finality, because clarity would end the hope that sustains the attachment. This is why limerence can feel all-consuming, not because the connection is deep, but because the mind is constantly trying to answer unresolved emotional questions. Limerence is not the same as love. Love is grounded in mutuality. Limerence is driven by longing, uncertainty, and preoccupation. And limerence is not defined by how the other person behaves. It is defined by what happens internally when emotional investment is not clearly returned. Let's quickly cover again what limerence looks like for the person experiencing it. They can experience persistent, repetitive thoughts about one person that are very hard to control. The highs and lows are tied to small interactions. They have difficulty focusing in other areas of their life. They experience a sense of waiting or suspended time. They feel emotionally regulated by contact and dysregulated by distance. Many people experiencing limerence describe feeling like themselves again only when there is some form of contact, and unsettled when there is not. This can be confusing, exhausting, and often accompanied by shame, especially when the person believes that they should just be able to let it go. If you're listening to this and you feel embarrassed or ashamed or wondering how you let yourself get this attached, I really want you to understand that limerence doesn't happen because there's something wrong with you. It happens because your brain and your nervous system responded to a very specific set of circumstances. Limerence forms when your mind is given just enough possibility to stay engaged, but not enough certainty to feel settled. This uncertainty keeps the emotional question open, and your brain keeps returning to it, trying to resolve it. This is not about weakness. This is just how the human brain works. When something feels emotionally significant but unresolved, the mind keeps circling it. Not because you're making a choice to obsess, but because the brain is wired to seek completion. So if you found yourself thinking about this person constantly, imagining different outcomes, replaying moments, waiting for signs, it's not because you were being irrational. That was your nervous system trying to make sense of something that never fully clarified itself. And people will often ask themselves why this person had such a hold on them, especially if they've dated other people without feeling this way. But limerence isn't about the other person being extraordinary. It's about the situation being unresolved. When someone occupies space where there is emotional possibility without emotional confirmation, while the mind fills in the blanks, it imagines closeness. It imagines a future that hasn't actually been offered. And the longer that question stays open, the more emotionally charged it becomes. This is also why limerence can feel disproportionate to the actual relationship. You might barely even know them, or the connection might never have progressed very far, but yet the feelings still feel enormous. And that's because limerence isn't fueled by shared history. It's fueled by unanswered emotional questions. Another thing that trips people up is this idea that once you understand what's happening, it should just stop. But limerence doesn't live in your rational mind. It lives in anticipation, imagination, and emotional dependency. So even if you logically understand that this situation isn't going anywhere, your body still reacts when you hear from them. Your thoughts may still drift back to them. The pull might still be there, but that doesn't mean anything about you. It just means that awareness comes before regulation, and compassion has to come before change. Trying to shame yourself out of limerence usually does the opposite. It strengthens it. Understanding it is what begins to loosen it. For the person experiencing limerence, it feels like being emotionally activated by small interactions. Feeling calm only when there's contact, feeling unsettled when there isn't, mentally living in the almost or the maybe, feeling like you're waiting for something that never quite arrives. And over time, this is exhausting. But again, this isn't because you're emotionally immature, but because your emotional system has been stuck in like a holding pattern. So if you take anything away from this part of the episode, let it be this. You didn't imagine the intensity. You didn't make it up, and you didn't experience it because there's something wrong with you. You experienced limerence because your brain was responding to uncertainty, hope, and emotional investment without resolution. And once you understand this, the questions you ask yourself should start to change. If you've been asking yourself, what's wrong with me? You need to instead start asking yourself, what did my system get caught in? And this is when the healing can start. And of course, a common question that people ask once they realize that they've been stuck in limerence is, why did this happen to me? Especially if you're someone that functions well in other areas of your life. You're self-aware, you're thoughtful, you're probably emotionally intelligent, and yet in this one situation, you felt completely undone. Limerence isn't random, and it isn't a character flaw, but some people are more susceptible to limerence because of how their mind and their nervous system respond to emotional uncertainty. If you tend to think deeply, imagine possibility, and feel things intensely, limerence can take hold of you more easily. Your mind doesn't skim the surface. It goes inward. It explores, it fills gaps. I have myself expressed in relationships where gaps existed that if you don't fill in these gaps for me, I will fill them in myself. Now, while I tend to fill them in with negativity, some people fill them with hope. When a connection is unclear, your brain doesn't leave it alone. It keeps turning it over, looking for meaning, looking for resolution. That's not dysfunction. That's a pattern recognition mixed up with emotional investment. People who experience limerence often have a strong capacity for emotional attachment. They bond very deeply. They care deeply. And when that bond is left unresolved, their system stays engaged. The bond isn't being maintained by shared experiences. It's being maintained by imagined ones. And this can be confusing because it feels like you're attached to the person, when in reality, you're attached to what feels possible with them. Another thing that people struggle with is how disconnected limerence can feel from logic. You might know that the situation isn't balanced. You might know you're not being met. You might even know that it's hurting you. And yet, your thoughts keep returning there. And that's because limerence isn't driven by reasoning. It's driven by anticipation and emotional reward. Your brain becomes highly sensitive to small signs of interest because they momentarily resolve that feeling of uncertainty. And once your system learns that relief comes from these moments, it keeps watching for them. This is not a conscious decision, though. It's conditioning. And it's why telling yourself to stop thinking about it almost never works. Limerence can feel deeply personal, like it's revealing something about your worth or desirability. When someone you're focused on doesn't fully choose you, it can trigger self-doubt. You might start questioning yourself, your value, or what you did wrong. But clinically, limerence isn't about your worth. It's about your system getting stuck on an unresolved emotional attachment. The intensity comes from uncertainty, not from the truth of the connection. And when you understand that, it becomes easier to separate what you felt from what it actually meant. If limerence has shown up for you more than once, it's not a sign that you keep choosing wrong. It's a sign that your system responds strongly to certain emotional conditions. It means your system is sensitive to emotional ambiguity. And sensitivity isn't a flaw. It's a trait that needs clarity and safety to settle. When clarity is missing, your system stays alert. When safety is missing, your mind keeps reaching. This isn't something to judge. It's something to understand. Because once you understand it, you can start recognizing the conditions that trigger limerence and respond differently to them. Not with shame, but with awareness. Limerence usually ends in one of two ways. Either there is clear resolution, or the emotional system finally exhausts itself. Clear resolution is when the situation becomes unstable. That might look like someone directly saying they don't want the same thing you want. Or you finally realize through their actions that they are never going to offer anything more than what's already happening. Sometimes it's the moment that you see evidence that makes it impossible for you to keep hoping. Sometimes it's a clean ending when contact stops and never restarts. In these moments, the question that kept your mind engaged finally gets answered. And even if that answer is painful, there is often an immediate shift in your body. Right away, you stop checking your phone the same way. You're not scanning for signs anymore. Your thoughts aren't constantly looping. There's a strange sense of calm that comes with that clarity. But there is also pain, because clarity also ends the fantasy. It ends the maybes and possibilities. It ends the version of the story that was living in your head. So you can feel relieved and heartbroken all at the same time. The other way that limerence ends is more gradual. There's not a dramatic situation or a big conversation. No clear goodbye. Your system just gets exhausted. You reach a point where the waiting takes up more energy than you have left. The emotional swings start to feel draining instead of exciting. The relief that you get from hearing from them gets shorter and shorter. You still care, but you don't have the same capacity to stay emotionally activated all the time. You might notice that you don't respond as quickly anymore. You're not rereading messages the same way, that you don't replay interactions as intensely. And it's not about you becoming detached or cold. It's your nervous system protecting you. And when limerence ends this way, it can feel really confusing, because part of you might wonder why the intensity faded without closure. But what actually happened is your system reached its limit. No matter how limerence ends, though, there's usually grief. If it ends through clarity, you grieve the loss of hope. If it ends to exhaustion, you grieve the loss of intensity. In both cases, you're letting go of something that occupied a lot of your emotional space. And that can feel unsettling, even if the situation itself wasn't fulfilling. And this is why people often feel sad and relieved at the same time. If you've ever experienced this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I have felt this oddly conflicting feeling a few times in my life. Your body is finally resting, but your heart is still catching up. When limerence ends, sometimes people judge themselves for how long it went on for, or how much it affected them. But limerence doesn't end because you reason your way out of it. It ends when uncertainty resolves, or when your emotional system can no longer sustain the cycle. And this isn't weakness, it's regulation. And once limerence loosens its grip, most people don't go backwards. They gain clarity about what they want and what their system needs in order to feel settled. And one of the most difficult things about limerence is that you don't usually realize what's happening until you're already deep in it. At the beginning, it doesn't necessarily feel unhealthy. It can feel exciting, even meaningful. And because there's often very little actual connection yet, it can be easy to dismiss what you're feeling as normal attraction. But there are early signs that what's forming isn't grounded in mutuality. It's forming internally. One of the first signs is how quickly your internal world starts organizing itself around the other person. You notice your mood shifting based on whether you hear from them or not. You start anticipating contact before it happens. You find yourself mentally checking in on the connection. Another early sign is how much mental space they take up relative to how much time you have actually spent together. You might not know them very well. You might not have shared much real life together, and yet they're showing up in your thoughts constantly. You replay conversations. You imagine future interactions. You think about what they might say or do next. That imbalance is important. Limerence grows when the emotional investment outpaces the actual relationship. Another early cue is what happens in your body, not your thoughts. Notice what happens when you don't hear from them. Do you feel unsettled, distracted, unable to fully focus on your own life? And then notice what happens when you do hear from them. Do you feel immediate relief? Like you can finally relax again? That swing between tension and relief is one of the clearest early markers of limerence. It means that your nervous system has already started to use contact as regulation. Another early sign is how much hope fills in the gaps. Instead of responding to what's actually happening, your mind starts responding to what might happen. You find yourself interpreting small moments as meaningful. You focus on potential instead of consistency. You tell yourself it's early, it's complicated, and while all of that might be true, if hope is carrying more weight than reality, limerence may be forming. If you recognize yourself in these early signs, it doesn't mean you need to cut things off immediately or start judging yourself. It means your system is sensitive to emotional possibility, and sensitivity, when understood, becomes discernment. When you're in limerence, your emotional balance is no longer fully inside you. It's actually being managed through another person's attention, responses, or presence. So rebuilding regulation isn't about forcing yourself to stop caring. It's about slowly bringing that regulation back into your own system. And that takes time. One of the things to understand is that the urge to check your phone, replay interactions, and wait for contact, it is your nervous system looking for relief. When you respond to that urge with judgment, it usually gets louder. When you respond with awareness, it starts to soften. So the first step is noticing when your emotional state shifts. Notice when your mood lifts after contact and when it drops during silence. You don't need to stop it right away. You just need to name it. That simple awareness creates a small pause between the feeling and the reaction. And this matters a lot. When external validation has been doing the regulating, your system needs new anchors, not distractions, but anchors. These are things that bring you back into your body and into the present moment. Moments that ground you, breathing that slows you down, and activities that require your full attention. Not to make the feelings go away, but to remind you that your body can settle without waiting for someone else. Over time, this helps your nervous system relearn safety internally. Another important piece of this is where meaning lives. In limerence, meaning gets concentrated in one person. Their attention feels significant and their absence feels loud. Rebuilding regulation means spreading meaning back across your life. So this includes your routines, your friendships, your interests, your sense of self, not all at once, but gradually. This reduces the emotional weight placed on one connection and gives your system back more balance. One of the most difficult parts of this process is allowing the feelings to exist without acting on them. Feeling the pull doesn't mean you have to respond to it. You can notice the urge to reach out. You can feel the longing without feeding the fantasy. And that doesn't make the feelings disappear immediately, but it stops reinforcing the cycle. And that's how the intensity slowly decreases. A lot of people try to detach before they're regulated. They cut contact, they suppress feelings, or tell themselves they should be over it, and that usually backfires. Regulation has to come first. Once your nervous system is more stable, detachment happens naturally, not forced, and not dramatically, but gradually. Learning to regulate without external validation isn't about becoming emotionally closed off. It's about becoming emotionally steady. And that steadiness is what allows future connections to feel calm, mutual, grounded, rather than all consuming. If you're listening to this and recognizing it in yourself, you don't have to untangle this on your own. A lot of the women that I work with come to my coaching because they feel stuck in patterns like this. They understand what's happening logically, but their body hasn't caught up yet. Coaching isn't about fixing you or telling you what to do. It's about helping you understand your patterns, regulate your nervous system, and choose connections that feel steady instead of consuming. If you're experiencing this and you want support working through it, I'll put the link to my coaching in the description. If this episode put into words something you've lived through but never fully understood, I hope what you're taking away is clarity and not self-judgment. Limerence can feel intense, confusing, and isolating when you don't know what it is. But once you understand what's happening inside you, the experience starts to make more sense. Not because it suddenly becomes easy, but because it becomes understandable. You weren't imagining the intensity. You weren't too much. You were responding to uncertainty, hope, and emotional investment without resolution. And that response was human. If you're still in the middle of it, be patient with yourself. Awareness doesn't end limerence overnight. It just gives you a starting point. And if this has been a pattern for you, it doesn't define you. It tells you something important about how your system responds to emotional ambiguity and unresolved connection. And understanding that gives you options. You can learn how to steady yourself without waiting for someone else to do it for you. You can start choosing connections that feel steady and grounded instead of consuming. As always, thank you so much for being here. Until next time, keep coming back to yourself, especially when something pulls you outward.